This is the video. Like, look at this. Stop defending Marxism-Leninism. It isn't a real ideology. Look at this person. Why would you ever listen to this person about anything? Like, you telling me anybody's coming in here after having read Marx and Lenin and being like, nah, this person seems to have it figured out. Sitting in their computer chair, making largely untrue statements about what Marxism-Leninism is.
Marxism-Leninism isn't a real ideology. Marx wrote theory.
Marxism-Leninism isn't a real ideology. I know it's the leading ideology of every existing socialist state in the world, and there are many of them, including China, which is the fastest rising country challenging US hegemony on the planet. But it's not real. I'm going to deny that it's real because I don't like it. Okay.
Marxism-Leninism isn't a real ideology. Marx wrote theory. Lenin wrote theory. Marxism-Leninism was a synthesized ideology that was promoted by Stalin's Russia as a way of creating a syncretic, state-oriented form of.
I love how they take all onus and all agency away from the Russian people and the people of the Soviet Union. You know, it was Stalin controlling Russia, and not just Russia, but all the surrounding states as well. He was able, just by himself, to trick all the workers into thinking Marxism-Leninism is real. It wasn't the workers taking power and overthrowing the horrible czarist monarchy. It was that Stalin tricked them all into believing a fake ideology, but thankfully Vaush can see through it, unlike those dumb Soviet workers who were tricked by Stalin into thinking they had a real revolution. How silly of them. They should have watched this dude in his gaming chair on Twitch.
So-called leftism that he could use to ideologically control both his own country and their puppet states around the world, or wannabe puppet states. Like, if you take a look at the ideological, tenets of Marxism-Leninism, they're really inconsistent. They literally vary country to country, which is why you hear Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics, or with Vietnamese characteristics, or with Cuban characteristics, or with Russian. Oh, what they're saying is that there's not actually a Marxism-Leninism. It's just.
This is like what we were talking about earlier on the last stream, how Marxism doesn't deal with universals. You know, there are universal sort of concepts or universal occurrences and reoccurrences that happen over time, like the fact that everything is in constant change. But that's exactly why we don't hold these universals, you know, and we don't have this one size fits all ideology or system that we think could be applied to every country. Because that's just not realistic. Not every country is at the same stage of development, right? Not every country has the same level of industry. So the policies that socialists and workers are going to have to enact in order to construct socialism are going to be different in every place. And the things that they're going to need to do in order to overthrow the bourgeoisie are going to be different. Like Lenin and then later Mao had to do the Lenin had to do the worker peasant alliance, right? Rather than just having this fully developed proletariat, because Russia didn't have fully developed capitalism, they allied with the peasant class. And then in China, they were mostly an agrarian society. They mostly had peasants. So it was largely a peasant revolution. And they've had to, you know, basically level skip industrialization. And they've managed to industrialize their country while bringing everybody out of poverty, while the West and the capitalist countries, it took many, many years to industrialize, many more years, and they did it through slavery and brutal exploitation. So not that there's not exploitation in China, there still is, but the workers are in power. And, you know, the idea that you can't have socialism with Chinese characteristics or Vietnamese characteristics, you need to. You need to. And you know, Vaush would actually take the time to study these countries, which he doesn't actually care to. He doesn't care. But read the debates within the parties. You know, read the debate within the Chinese Communist Party when they're planning their economic policy after the revolution. They're looking at what the Soviet Union did. They're looking at what former Yugoslavia did. They're looking at what all these other countries did, seeing what worked and what didn't, what can be applied to China's context and what can't. and then they're adapting what would work for them. They're taking what would work for them and they applied it. Socialism with Chinese characteristics. So it was different than the socialism of the other countries, because socialism should always be changing, improving, and learning from its mistakes, and it's going to be different based on the historical and material conditions and the context of every country. It doesn't prove that Marxism-Leninism is not real. Like, dude, just stop lying. Just stop lying and read. It's actually good stuff, Marxism-Leninism. You'd like it. Probably not, actually.
Just a state ideology. They're essentially saying Marxism-Leninism is a broad label that you just use alongside a state apparatus to justify the existence of that state. Was it Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics when China deregulated its markets and opened free commerce districts with private ownership of capital? Yes, MLs will literally say
they didn't deregulate their markets. So you don't even know what you're talking about. Their markets are heavily regulated, much more so than any of the markets in the US. Well, we have the state come in and regulate markets by bailing out capitalists and giving subsidies to capitalists. But in China, they have Communist Party members sitting on the board of different companies telling them what to do. Companies have to do things that are in line with the state central plan. Billionaires get executed for corruption. It's not that they deregulated their markets, it's that they allowed private capital to come in certain specific controlled zones, which brought in more markets. So this is the period of reform and opening up, which did allow for more market production in China, and more foreign markets to penetrate China. That doesn't mean they deregulated their markets, because the whole idea was we were going to heavily regulate these markets. And there was a wild period, in China, when the markets first came in. It was a period of great change. But since then, since the reform and opening up period, they've only regulated their markets more. They've only gone through with these anti-corruption efforts to try and weed out the control of private capital in their government and in the party. They've only gone through with more of these, and then you have the poverty alleviation efforts, with these efforts of central planning where party cadres are in control of every area. And through controlled economic planning, they make sure every single person in every single area has what they need, which is how they've abolished relative poverty, which the UN has recognized as an incredible achievement. They didn't deregulate markets. You don't know what you're talking about. You're spouting off about things you do not understand. And if you would read this pamphlet we just published, it's very, very good. It's called No Great Wall: On the Continuities of the Chinese Revolution by Carlos Martinez. It's a very good book. We know Vaush doesn't read, but if he did, he should try this. It would explain how the reform and opening up period was not an end to China's socialist revolution, and it certainly doesn't prove that Marxism-Leninism is not real. Whatever that even means.
say, yeah, that's just Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics. At which point, what the are we talking about? It doesn't mean anything. It's just a way of defending the state. So, yes, if somebody is sincerely
a way of defending the worker state, the state that the proletariat is in charge of, yeah, that is why we defend China, because their state actually acts that way. If their state didn't actually act in that fashion, we wouldn't defend it, but it does. Their state actually did alleviate poverty. Their state actually does use the wealth of private markets and private capital and foreign investment to better the lives of the people and serve the people. Which is why dictatorship of the proletariat is one of those foundational principles of Marxism-Leninism that Vaush says don't exist. This is Eddie editing this in the future, by the way. Hello. If it didn't do that, we wouldn't support the state. The state actually defends their people from imperialism and stops them from being penetrated and destroyed by the Western capitalist imperialists. If it didn't do that, we wouldn't support it so much.
ML, like they actually hold that shit. Yeah, I'd call them a tanky. They're just an autocrat with, a leftist veneer. They might, however, think of Marxism-Leninism as just like they like some elements of Soviet ideology, and there are some things the Soviet Union did that I think are defensible. In which case, like I would say they're misusing the terminology. Whatever. Isn't Leninism already pretty whack? Yes, I have plenty of problems.
The Soviet Union was around for so long. And they literally beat Hitler and the Yazis. 80% of World War II casualties were people dying in the Soviet Union. Or 80% of Allied casualties, I believe, were the Soviet Union. They got directly invaded by the German army and defeated them. They abolished illiteracy. They brought everyone healthcare. They industrialized their country in a matter of years. You're like, there are some things they did that were okay. When they defeated Hitler and taught everyone to read, that was all right. It was still pretty authoritarian of them to force everyone to read. I hate reading.
Problems with Leninism as well, but Marxism-Leninism is that much worse.
Someone told me like anarchists or anarcho-communists or just liberal communists like Vaush, liberal fake communists like Vaush are just people like rebelling against their parents. And they just like translate politics or translate that to politics. So like they just want no authority. They just want to be able to do whatever they want and have pure individualistic freedom. And that's politics for them. And rebelling against any kind of authority is their only sort of politics.
Of course. If Marxist-Leninists are tankies and tankies are fascist, do you believe Castro and Che, etc., were fascist? This is your problem, Chess, and I love you, but let me explain, okay? You're too...
That's a great point. That's a great point. You just said Marxism-Leninism applied to all these countries isn't real. What about socialism with Cuban characteristics when Che Guevara helped overthrow Batista, the gangster dictator, and then ran the country's economy? He helped run the country's economy for years via the state. The state. The government. The thing that you hate and you rebel against like it's your mom or your dad. Che Guevara was involved in, constructing socialism with Cuban characteristics, applying Marxism-Leninism to Cuba, which you just said isn't real. So now you're going to lecture this person in your chat who just like destroyed your argument in one sentence.
Obsessed with labels right now. The problem is that labels suck at telling you what a person actually believes because everybody has subtly or very...
Che Guevara believes in Marxism-Leninism. And Che Guevara supported the Stalin who you hate so much. Ho Chi Minh supported Marxism-Leninism. Mao Zedong supported Marxism-Leninism. What do you mean we're getting caught up in labels? You just don't want to call people who are popular among pretty much all socialists. You just don't want to call them a tanky or a red fash or whatever that you call your enemies on the internet. You just don't want to say that about Che Guevara when all these people are Marxist-Leninists. And yes, they all wanted to apply Marxism-Leninism to their own conditions, but you just said earlier that proves that applying Marxism-Leninism to, different conditions in different ways proves that it's not a real ideology. But now you're going to defend these people who wanted to apply Marxism-Leninism in different ways because they're popular, and you're just a grifter.
Different understandings of what labels actually mean, and people will place different priorities on what it is they actually practice. For example, the Black Panther Party was full of Maoists. The Black Panther Party spent their time doing really based. Did they spend their time, for example, starving 40 million Americans by practicing like Senkoist agricultural policies? Did the Black Panther Party force a bunch of farmers in America to construct pig iron rather than raise crops and therefore lead to mass starvation? No. So when the Black Panther Party calls themselves Maoist, what do they actually mean? What are they referring to? Well, in their case, they were referring largely to organizational and revolutionary structures, whereas in the case of regular people who call themselves Maoists, I interpret that as a defense of Mao.
Oh, so you support Marxist-Leninists and Maoists who don't actually take power, who don't actually create a revolution and take power of the state. I see. So the Black Panthers were okay because they didn't actually have to craft agricultural policy and industrialize their country and bring the billions of or millions of peasants out of poverty. Because the Black Panthers were just criticizing the US state, the capitalist state, but never actually had to run a state of their own, that's why they're okay. Okay, so I got it. Everybody is okay unless they were actually successful in having a revolution and then building socialism. Okay, so as socialists though, Vaush, how does that make any sense? Right? If we're just going to deny that any socialist state is real or good, and any socialist who actually takes power we're going to consider bad and an evil dictator, it seems like we're never going to be successful, right? It seems like we're just going to fetishize failure, and fetishize any sort of revolutionary group who failed to take power and create their own state. It's almost like that's your whole ideology. It's a safe ideology for the establishment because it fetishizes any kind of revolutionary movement that actually didn't actually take power of the state and have to construct something new. It's okay to criticize. It's not okay to take power and actually build something different.
Like as a leader who is a horrible leader, good revolutionary, terrible leader. So these terms mean different things to.
He literally says it. Good revolutionary, terrible leader. Yeah, you're allowed to attack the capitalist state and talk about how it's terrible, but then you can't lead people forward to anything better. We're anarchists. We just have to criticize everything and burn it all down. For sure, that seems productive, Vaush.
Depending on who's using them and why. Castro did a lot of stuff that I horribly disagree with, but overall, man did some pretty impressive stuff. I can't take that away from him. Sankara did a ton of really cool stuff, but a lot of the terms that he used and the people he associated with, I disagree with today. In reality, labels are just an.
Fidel, he was actually okay. Sankara, he was even better because he took power. He controlled the state. He called himself a Marxist-Leninist, which is stupid and bad and authoritarian. But then he got killed. He died. So it's not like he stayed in power. So that was pretty good of him. I hate this stuff. We're done with this. No more sending me this ever. Just kidding. Y'all can keep sending me that. I'm not going to react to Vaush too much, though. It's so bad and silly. Vaush is all about the December defeat, as Lenin would say, yes. It's the purity fetish that Carlos talks about. Anybody who's not perfect, anybody who doesn't meet all of their idealistic moral standards of what it means to be good, gets thrown out. And he just eats up so much Western propaganda. It's nuts. He eats it up. Look into the first years of China's revolution with their agricultural policy that he was talking about killed so many people. I mean, the best quote about this is every famine that happened in a socialist country was the last famine, right? Because yes, these countries were in poverty, right? And they weren't industrialized. So there were famines for years and years and years in China. But then after the socialist revolution, after the agricultural policies and the collectivization and industrialization of agriculture, there are no famines. And now they've gotten to the point where they've completely gotten rid of poverty. And, Mao and Deng and people within China were honest. There were mistakes during the collectivization and industrialization process. There were mistakes that were made. They weren't perfect. They could have done some things different in hindsight that probably would have saved people's lives. But it was poor weather conditions and the fact that they, weren't an industrialized country. They were a peasant society with, borderline slavery for most of the country's labor force before that revolution. So yeah, their agricultural policy wasn't perfect, but those 10 years after the revolution were the largest increase and the fastest increase in life expectancy that have ever been seen in human history anywhere. They did it even faster than the Soviets. The industrialization, teaching their people to read, bringing people out of poverty, bringing people clean water, bringing people food. You know, they did these things faster than any other country in history. And we're sitting in the US, this country that industrialized on the backs of literal slaves in the American South and brutal exploitation and child labor and all these terrible things. We're like, China's evil. They're bad. They're not real Marxists. I am a real Marxist. A real Marxist is one who does nothing. Vaush.